In 1987, a night guard assigned near the old Tanglin Camp reported hearing boots on gravel at 2:17 a.m., not footsteps, marching, slow, synchronized, coming from the direction of the old barrack blocks. When he raised his torch, the road was empty, but the sound continued past him, as if an invisible platoon had just walked through the gate. Before restaurants, galleries, and quiet roads, this hill was military ground. Tanglin Barracks began as a British colonial barracks built in the 1860s, after the authorities decided European troops should be stationed away from the crowded town. The land had once been part of a nutmeg estate. By the late 1800s, soldiers were sleeping in raised timber buildings, surrounded by jungle, animals, heat, and isolation. The first account in the file does not mention a ghost. It simply says, "Male figure observed near former ward." The guard described him as thin, wearing what looked like an old khaki uniform, standing beside a window with his back turned. When the guard called out, the man did not move. When the torchlight touched him, the figure was gone, but the window shutters were still swinging inward against the wind. Witnesses disagreed on what they saw, but they agreed on where it happened. The sounds always moved between the old barrack blocks, then stopped near the former hospital side. Tanglin's early buildings were designed for ventilation, raised floors, open verandas, many windows. At night, that architecture carried sound strangely. A door closing in one block could sound like it came from another, but no one could explain the marching. On the 15th of February 1915, during the Singapore Mutiny, soldiers from the 5th Native Infantry moved toward the German prisoner of war camp near Tanglin Barracks. Historical accounts record that men were killed at Tanglin: British military personnel, Singapore Volunteer Corps members, Johor Military Force soldiers, and one German prisoner. The camp had already learned the sound of panic before the Second World War ever arrived. In one later account, 2 maintenance workers claimed they left a cassette recorder running overnight after hearing voices from an empty block. The tape picked up insects, traffic, rainwater dripping from the roof. And at 3:06 a.m., a voice, male, soft, not English, not clearly Malay, Tamil, or Mandarin. Just 5 repeated syllables, followed by the sound of someone dragging a metal bed frame across the floor. Tanglin once had military medical facilities, and Dempsey's own history notes that a Tanglin hospital served British forces until the period before World War II. Former workers later described one corridor where the smell changed suddenly: antiseptic, wet canvas, and something metallic. One cleaner said she heard a man coughing behind a locked door. When the door was opened, the room was empty, but the floor was wet in the shape of bare feet. When Singapore fell in February 1942, Tanglin Barracks was taken over by Japanese forces. It later became one of the assembly points from which British and Australian troops were marched toward internment in Shanxi. Some witnesses believe the haunting was not one ghost, but several memories layered together: colonial troops, wartime prisoners, hospital patients, and men who never left the hill. The strangest report came from a conscript who passed through the area in the late 1970s. He said a woman stood under the veranda after midnight, facing the road. Her clothes looked too old for the time. When he looked again, she was closer. Not walking, just closer. He ran back toward the lit office block. The next morning, he found red mud on his boots, though he insisted he never stepped off the paved road. Years later, an interviewer asked the retired guard whether he believed Tanglin Camp was haunted. He said no at first. Then he corrected himself. Not haunted, he said. Occupied. He claimed some places do not empty when people leave. They continue following the oldest routine: Lights out, inspection, roll call, marching. And if you heard your name after midnight, you were never supposed to answer. During the final walkthrough, Bettine placed one recorder in the corridor, one facing the veranda, and one near the old road. At 3:06 a.m., all three devices captured the same sound. 3 knocks, a pause, and marching. The footsteps crossed the veranda, moved past the microphone, and stopped beside the locked room. On the camera, nothing appeared, but the audio showed one final detail: someone breathing directly into the recorder. Today, Tanglin's old military landscape has been transformed, but the buildings remain close to their past: verandas, columns, roofs, roads, and rooms that once held soldiers waiting for orders. The official records tell us who built the barracks, who occupied them, and when the camp changed hands. They do not explain why, on certain wet nights, people still hear a platoon marching uphill toward a roll call that never ends. Would you enter Tanglin Camp after 3 a.m.?